Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Lucas Calloway had always believed in loyalty, in marriage, in friendship, in family. But in one single moment, that belief shattered. It was just another late night at work. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he closed his laptop, rubbing his tired eyes. His phone vibrated. Savannah's name lit up the screen. His wife. The woman he had built a life with. "Hey babe, you coming home soon?" she texted. "Yeah, wrapping up now," he replied. But then another phone buzzed on his desk. Not his. Savannah had forgotten her phone at his office earlier. He never had a habit of snooping, but a single notification appeared on the screen. A message that made his stomach drop. "Nathan Sterling, he's leaving in 20 minutes. I can't wait anymore." His best friend. The man he trusted like a brother. His pulse pounded in his ears. His hands trembled as he unlocked the phone. Message after message. A secret thread of betrayal stretching back months. "Nathan, last night was incredible. He has no clue. Savannah, I just wish we didn't have to hide anymore. Soon babe. Soon." His vision blurred. His chest tightened. The air in the room became suffocating. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to his face? A rage like he had never known simmered beneath his skin. He clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the phone. Should he confront her? Should he wait? Should he act like he didn't know and see how deep this betrayal went? Did he even want to hear her lies one more time? Lucas forced himself to breathe. He couldn't let anger control him, not yet. He needed to see it with his own eyes. He left his office, phone still in hand, and drove home. Every red light, every passing car, it all blurred into the background. His mind raced through every moment he had spent with Savannah and Nathan. How had he not seen this? When he pulled into his driveway, Savannah was already waiting at the door. She smiled, walking up to him. That same smile he used to love. "Hey, handsome. Long day?" she asked, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. His stomach churned. She smelled like perfume. Not hers. He forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." He studied her face. No guilt. No hesitation. Just a liar playing her role perfectly. Inside, she curled up on the couch as if nothing was wrong. "I was thinking we could go out tomorrow, maybe have a little weekend getaway?" Weekend getaway. He almost laughed. Was that her way of making sure he was out of the house so she could sneak Nathan in? "You go ahead and relax," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "I need to grab something from the store." He walked out and drove straight past the grocery store. Straight past every excuse he could have given. He parked 2 blocks away from Nathan's place and waited. Minutes passed. His heart pounded with every second. Then Savannah's car pulled up. His fingers dug into the steering wheel. His breath came out in sharp bursts as he watched her get out, fix her hair, and knock on Nathan's door. When Nathan opened it, they kissed like they had done it 1,000 times before. A deep, primal fury settled in his bones. She didn't even hesitate. Didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. She had done this before. She was comfortable. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. Lucas had seen enough. But instead of storming in, instead of causing a scene, he pulled out his phone. This wasn't just about catching them. This was about making them pay. The next morning, Lucas sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He needed to talk to someone. Someone who would understand. His father. Richard Calloway was a man of influence, a man who had built an empire from nothing. He had always been tough on Lucas, but he had always said, "Family comes first." If there was anyone who could help him navigate this nightmare, it was him. Lucas drove to his father's mansion, heart pounding. The house loomed ahead, tall and intimidating, just like the man who owned it. Inside, Richard sat in his grand office, sipping coffee, reading the newspaper like it was any other day. Lucas didn't waste time. "Savannah is cheating on me," he said, his voice hoarse. "With Nathan." Richard didn't flinch. He folded the newspaper carefully, placed it aside, and took another sip of coffee. "I know." Lucas's stomach dropped. "I know." The words echoed in his head, shattering any remaining trust he had left in his family. His father leaned back in his chair, looking at him with zero emotion. "It's been going on for a while." Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. "And you didn't think to tell me?" Richard sighed. "You were too weak to see it yourself." And to be honest, Lucas, it was inevitable. His pulse roared in his ears. What the hell does that mean? Richard stood up, fixing his cufflinks like this was just another business meeting. Savannah came to me a few months ago. Told me you weren't focused. That you were dragging my company down. Lucas's blood ran cold. Your company? You thought Callaway Industries was yours? Richard chuckled. I let you manage it. But I've been protecting it. And Savannah, well, she knew how to protect it better than you. Lucas felt sick. His own father had sided with the woman who betrayed him. You helped her? Lucas's voice was barely a whisper. I made sure she got what she wanted. Richard gave him a cruel smile. And in return she's helping me restructure everything. Nathan will be involved too. Nathan. His best friend. His father. His wife. They had all stabbed him in the back. Lucas's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. You think you've beaten me? Lucas whispered, his entire body trembling with rage. Richard sighed, shaking his head. You were never built for this world, son. Now, just walk away before you embarrass yourself any more. Lucas looked him dead in the eye. No, Dad. I'm just getting started. Lucas barely remembered driving home. His hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that his nails dug into his skin, leaving deep red crescents. His own father had betrayed him. His wife. His best friend. His blood. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When he pulled into his driveway, Savannah was already outside, her arms crossed, her expression far too smug for a woman who had just been caught. I was wondering when you'd come home, she said. Lucas stepped out, the weight of the night pressing on his shoulders. How long? His voice was low, controlled. Savannah sighed like this was a minor inconvenience. Lucas, let's not do this. He let out a sharp laugh. Oh, we're doing this? How long have you been screwing my best friend? She didn't even blink. Does it matter? Lucas clenched his fists. Mattered. Every second of it mattered. I saw you last night, he said. Saw you walk into his house like it was yours. For the first time she hesitated, but then she shrugged. I suppose it was bound to happen. Bound to happen. Like their marriage was nothing. Like he was nothing. Here's the thing, Lucas, she continued, stepping closer. Nathan is ambitious. You've been too comfortable. Too predictable. I needed more. Too predictable. Lucas felt the rage coil inside him, but he refused to explode. Not yet. Not here. Is that why you and my father planned to take everything from me? He asked coldly. Savannah didn't deny it. Instead she smiled. You were just in the way, Lucas. And now, you're nothing. Then she walked inside and shut the door behind her. And Lucas stood there, watching the life he built crumble around him. Lucas sat in the dark, staring at the divorce papers on the table. Savannah had left them neatly stacked, like she was doing him a favor. His company? Gone. His house? Taken. His dignity? Shattered. But if they thought he was going to just walk away, they had no idea who they were dealing with. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. For a moment he considered ignoring it. Then something inside him whispered, answer it. He picked up. Who is this? A deep voice spoke. I know what they did to you. And I can help. Lucas's heart pounded. Why should I trust you? Because you have nothing left to lose. The line went dead. Lucas exhaled slowly. Nothing left to lose. And that's when he made his decision. They weren't going to win. They were going to pay. But before he could take his next step, he had one thing to ask. Before we move forward, tell me, where are you watching this from? I want to know which city you're in. Which streets this story is reaching. Drop your city in the comments because this revenge? It's just getting started. Lucas didn't pack a bag. Didn't say goodbye. He simply left. The city he had built his life in was now a graveyard of memories. But he wasn't running. No, he was preparing. He met the man behind the call, Julian Cross. A businessman. A strategist. A man who had once been betrayed just like him. You want to destroy them? Julian asked, watching Lucas closely. Lucas's jaw tightened. I want them to suffer. Julian smirked. Then let's get to work. For the next several months, Lucas disappeared from the world. He learned everything: business warfare, financial sabotage, psychological destruction. He trained his mind. His body. He rebuilt himself into something stronger. The next time he walked into that city, he wouldn't be the man they destroyed. He would be their worst nightmare. Lucas sat in a sleek, modern office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that wasn't his. Not yet. Julian Cross leaned back in his leather chair, assessing him with sharp, calculating eyes. Revenge isn't just about payback, Lucas. It's about control. Lucas clenched his fists. I don't care about control. I just want to watch them burn. Julian smirked. That's where you're wrong. If you burn them, it's over in seconds. If you take control, you make them watch their world fall apart, piece by piece. Lucas exhaled slowly. He had spent his life thinking fairness mattered, that loyalty meant something. He had been naive. The people he trusted had played the game better than him. Now he was here to learn how to play it better than them. 4 months, Julian threw him into the world of high-stakes business, underground deals, and corporate warfare. Lucas learned how to pull strings behind the scenes, how to turn people against each other without them even realizing it. Control information, control power, Julian instructed. And when you make a move, make sure it's final. Lucas soaked in every lesson, every tactic. He studied how to bankrupt a company from the inside. How to plant rumors that destroyed reputations. How to manipulate people into betraying their own allies. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was strategy. One night, as he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. He was no longer Lucas Calloway, the trusting husband, the good son, the loyal friend. That version of him was dead. The new Lucas? He was ready to return. Austin, Texas. The city that once belonged to him. Lucas walked through the familiar streets, dressed in a sharp black suit, his presence commanding attention. Nobody recognized him at first glance, not until their eyes widened in shock. He was supposed to be gone. But now, he was back. The first move wasn't direct. It wasn't loud. It was subtle. A mysterious investor began buying shares in Calloway Industries, the company his father had stolen from him. Nathan's construction business started facing supply chain delays, mysterious ones that made investors nervous. And Savannah? She received an anonymous email. You know what you did. Your time is coming. She deleted it, but her hands shook as she did. Lucas watched from the shadows as they felt the first taste of fear. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. Nathan Sterling sat in his luxurious office, feet propped up on the desk, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. His phone buzzed. Investor 1, we need to talk about these sudden losses. Investor 2, pulling my shares. Risk is too high. Investor 3, what the hell is going on? Nathan frowned, sitting up. What the hell was this? He checked his stock values. His company had dropped 15% overnight. Panic crawled up his spine. He called his financial advisor. What's happening? The man hesitated. It's a pattern we've seen before, sir. Someone's quietly pulling strings to make the market lose faith in your business. Nathan gritted his teeth. Who? Silence. Then a slow, hesitant answer. There's a name circulating in business circles lately. Someone making quiet but dangerous moves. Nathan's blood ran cold as the name was spoken. Lucas Calloway. For the first time in his life, Nathan felt real fear. The night was electric. A grand gala hosted at Austin's most exclusive venue, a place where only the wealthy, powerful, and untouchable gathered. Lucas Calloway walked through the towering glass doors, his presence commanding immediate attention. The last time people had spoken his name in this city, it had been in whispers of his downfall. Now they whispered something else. Who is that? Is that Lucas? I thought he was finished. He smirked, ignoring their stares as he grabbed a whiskey from the bar. And then he saw them. Nathan. Savannah. Richard. They were here. Of course they were. Nathan stood with his usual overconfidence, but his eyes held something new, paranoia. His once flawless company was falling apart, and he had no idea who was pulling the strings. Savannah was radiant as always, playing the role of the perfect high society woman. But Lucas knew her better than anyone. Her smile was tight, her fingers tapping anxiously against her wine glass. And Richard? The great Richard Calloway stood with a glass of bourbon in his hand, watching everything like he still controlled it all. He didn't? Not anymore. Lucas made his move. He walked straight into their circle, forcing them to acknowledge him. Savannah's glass slipped in her hand, nearly spilling as her face drained of color. Nathan stiffened, his jaw clenching. Richard. Richard's lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes held something colder. Well, Richard said smoothly, I'd say welcome back, but I didn't expect to see you return after we took everything from you. Lucas sipped his whiskey. Unbothered. Unshaken. Completely in control. I should be thanking you, he said with a slow smile. You turned me into something better than I ever was. Nathan scoffed. That right? Because from where I'm standing, you still look like a loser with nothing. Lucas laughed softly. Are you sure about that? He turned to the giant screen mounted on the wall, where the stock market numbers flashed. In real time, Nathan's company shares plummeted. The room filled with murmurs. People took out their phones, whispering. Investors walked away. Nathan paled, realizing what had just happened. Lucas leaned in, voice low and dangerous. You didn't notice the hands pulling your strings, did you, Nathan? You were always too arrogant to see the downfall coming. Savannah grabbed Nathan's arm. What the hell is he talking about? Lucas gave her a look of pure amusement. You'll find out soon enough. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the ruins of their own fear. Savannah slammed the door shut behind her, throwing her clutch onto the marble counter. Who the hell does he think he is? She spat, pacing the living room. Nathan was silent. Too silent. She turned to him. Nathan. His hands were balled into fists, his breathing ragged. He's screwing with my company. With my life. Savannah scoffed. Please. He's nothing. Nathan's head snapped up. He's not nothing. Not anymore. For the first time, Savannah felt something crawl under her skin. Doubt. Lucas had looked different tonight. Not just in appearance but in the way he carried himself. No anger. No desperation. Only control. And control meant power. Nathan stormed toward his desk, grabbing his laptop. I need to find out how deep this goes. Savannah hesitated. And what if he's coming for me too? Nathan barely looked at her. Then you'd better hope he still has some pathetic love for you left. But deep down, Savannah knew the truth. Lucas wasn't the same man. And he was coming for both of them. Savannah wasn't a fool. She had built her life on manipulation, on always being 3 steps ahead. But Lucas? He had been predictable. Soft. Not anymore. That night, she poured herself a drink, sitting by the window overlooking the city. She opened her phone to check social media, and froze. Her name was trending. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the notifications. Savannah Calloway exposed. The affair that destroyed a marriage and a business. Leaked photos. Text messages. Conversations she thought were long buried. She shot up from the chair. What the hell? Her phone rang. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. Who is this? A familiar voice spoke. Calm. Steady. Ruthless. Do you remember how you smirked at me the night you took everything, Savannah? Her breath hitched. Lucas. Keep watching. This is just the beginning. The line went dead. She turned back to her phone, staring in horror as more and more secrets spilled onto the internet. Lucas had planted the first seeds of her downfall. And she had nowhere to run. Nathan Sterling prided himself on being in control. Control of his business. Control of his relationships. Control of his life. But control was slipping through his fingers, and he felt it with every passing second. He sat in his home office, screens glowing in the dark, showing the chaos unfolding. His company's stock had dropped another 12% overnight. Investors were bailing. Contracts were being canceled. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone was doing this to him. And he knew exactly who. Lucas Calloway. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Lucas was supposed to be broken. Gone. Ruined. Not this. Nathan grabbed his phone and dialed a number he swore he'd never use. His father-in-law. Richard Calloway answered on the first ring. Nathan. You sound like you're panicking. Nathan ran a frustrated hand through his hair. Lucas is screwing with me. I don't know how, but he's tanking my business. There was a pause. Then Richard chuckled. Actually chuckled. Nathan's blood boiled. You think this is funny? It's funny that you thought Lucas was weak, Richard said. I always told him he didn't have it in him. Guess I was wrong. Nathan's hand tightened around the phone. I need to stop him. Richard exhaled, unimpressed. And how do you propose to do that? He's already ahead of you. Nathan slammed his fist on the desk. I need resources. Connections. Something. Richard's voice turned cold. Figure it out yourself. You're on your own. The call disconnected. Nathan sat there staring at the phone, heart pounding. His business was falling apart. His father-in-law had abandoned him. And Lucas? Lucas was winning. Richard Calloway was not a man who lost. For decades, he had built an empire, crushed competition, and held power over everyone in his life. But now, the walls were closing in. Sitting in his penthouse office, he read the latest reports, his stomach twisting. The government had opened an investigation into his company. The whispers of fraud, of dirty business deals were now headlines. His jaw tightened. He knew exactly who had done this. Lucas. A knock sounded at his door. His assistant walked in pale. Sir, we have a problem. She placed a printed document on his desk. An email leak. Richard's eyes skimmed the words. Private emails, hidden transactions, backdoor deals, all exposed. His grip on the paper tightened. This wasn't just an attack. This was an execution. Lucas hadn't just come back for revenge. He had come to erase Richard from power. Savannah Calloway had always believed she was untouchable. Her beauty, her charm, her connections, they had always protected her. But not anymore. She walked into her favorite upscale restaurant, head held high, ignoring the people who whispered behind their hands. Until she reached the hostess stand. The young woman behind the podium smiled tightly. Mrs. Calloway, I'm afraid there's been a policy change. You're no longer on our preferred guest list. Savannah blinked. Excuse me? The woman hesitated, then slid a phone across the podium. A video was playing. Savannah's stomach dropped. It was a leaked recording of her and Nathan taken months ago, the night they first plotted against Lucas. Their voices clear, their betrayal undeniable. The hostess pulled the phone back. Management has decided that we no longer wish to be associated with this kind of behavior. Savannah's face burned. Do you have any idea who I am? The hostess smiled politely. I think everyone knows who you are now. Laughter rippled through the restaurant. Savannah's breath hitched as she turned, seeing old friends whispering, smirking. They were enjoying her humiliation. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, heels clicking angrily against the pavement. This was Lucas. He wasn't just ruining Nathan and Richard. He was destroying her piece by piece. And the worst part? She had no way to stop him. Nathan Sterling had always been untouchable. Or at least that's what he believed. For years, he had climbed his way to power, manipulating deals, stealing opportunities, and betraying whoever he needed to if it meant staying at the top. But Lucas had changed everything. He sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the financial reports on his screen. His company had lost over 40% of its value in just 2 weeks. Clients were pulling out. Investors were selling their shares. The empire he had built was crumbling right in front of him. And worst of all, he didn't even know how Lucas was doing it. His hands trembled as he reached for his whiskey glass, but before he could take a sip, his office door burst open. Mr. Sterling, we have a situation. His CFO, Anthony Marshall, stormed in looking pale and panicked. Nathan's patience was already razor thin. What now? Anthony slammed a folder onto his desk. It's over. The IRS just launched a full-scale audit on our books. Every financial record, every transaction, everything, they're digging through all of it. Nathan's blood ran cold. That's impossible. It's not. Anthony's voice was grim. Someone sent them detailed reports about shady deals you made years ago. They have everything, Nathan. Everything. Nathan felt like the walls were closing in. Lucas. Had to be Lucas. His former best friend wasn't just hitting him in business. He was ensuring that Nathan had no way out. Panic surged through him. If the government got involved, if they found proof of fraud, he wouldn't just lose money. He could lose his freedom. He shot to his feet. We need to find a way to bury this. Anthony gave him a look of pure defeat. There is no way. Nathan exhaled shakily, his entire life spiraling. He had stolen everything from Lucas once. And now Lucas was taking it all back. Richard Calloway wasn't a man who accepted defeat. For decades, he had ruled his empire with an iron fist, crushing competitors, silencing enemies, and controlling every piece of the game. But for the first time in his life, he was losing. And the worst part? His own son was responsible. He sat in his massive office, watching the news reports flashing across the screen. Headlines exposed his corrupt dealings, his company's falling stock, and his slow, humiliating downfall. This wasn't bad luck. This was war. His assistant Laura walked in looking nervous. "Sir, we just got word that 2 major investors are pulling out. They don't want their names attached to the company anymore." Richard exhaled through his nose, barely controlling his rage. "And what about the lawsuit?" Laura hesitated. "It's moving forward. The DA's office just confirmed they're pressing charges for fraud and tax evasion." Richard's grip on his whiskey glass tightened. Lucas had done this. He had underestimated his son. Thought he was weak. Thought he didn't have what it took to fight back. But Lucas had learned. And he was destroying Richard the same way Richard had once destroyed others. His mind raced for a way out. There had to be a way out. And then he realized there was only one person who might be able to stop this. Savannah. She still had influence in high society. If she could use her connections, if she could turn the tide. He grabbed his phone and dialed her number. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice bitter. "What do you want?" Richard clenched his jaw. "We need to talk. In person." Silence. Then, "Fine. But you're buying the drinks." He smirked coldly. "That won't be a problem. At least not yet." Savannah Calloway had always known how to play the game. She had charmed powerful men, manipulated situations, and always landed on her feet. But Lucas had changed the rules. She sat across from Richard in the private VIP section of an upscale bar. Even here, people were whispering about her. She hated it. Richard swirled his drink, his face as unreadable as ever. "You're losing, Savannah." She smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Tell me something I don't know." He leaned in. "We need to fix this before it's too late." Savannah scoffed. "And what do you think I can do? Lucas is running circles around all of us." Richard's voice turned sharp. "Then it's time to fight dirty." Savannah raised an eyebrow. "We already fought dirty. And guess what? We lost." Richard exhaled. "Maybe not. There's one last move left." He slid a manila folder across the table. Savannah hesitated before opening it. Her heart stopped. Inside were pictures. Documents. Information about Lucas that had been buried for years. Richard's voice was smooth. "Dangerous. We leak this and Lucas goes down just like he took us down." Savannah traced her finger along the edge of the folder, her mind racing. This was it. Their last move. If they played it right, Lucas would finally be destroyed. She looked up, meeting Richard's eyes. "And if it backfires?" Richard's smile was cold. "Then we take him down with us." For the first time in months, Savannah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Lucas wasn't untouchable after all. Richard Calloway had built his empire on fear, control, and ruthless precision. For years he had been the man no one dared to cross. The kind of man who could ruin lives with a single phone call. The king of the boardroom. But kings could fall. And Richard was falling fast. Sitting in his now empty penthouse office, he stared at the breaking news headlines flashing across the screen. AC investigates Calloway Industries for corporate fraud. He had lost billions overnight. His assets were frozen. Lucas had dismantled his legacy piece by piece. His phone rang. He already knew who it was before he answered. "Savannah." Her voice was clipped. "The media's running with it. They're saying you falsified tax documents for years. The DA's office is getting involved. This is bigger than we thought." Richard's grip on the phone tightened. Lucas had pushed him into a corner. And Richard knew what men like him did when they had nothing left to lose. "We strike back," Richard said, voice razor sharp. "We leak what we have on Lucas. Every skeleton in his closet." There was a pause. Then, "Do you think that'll stop him?" Savannah asked. Richard's jaw clenched. "If it doesn't, we take him down another way." A slow, dangerous pause. Savannah exhaled. "Fine. But if this backfires, I'm not going down with you." Richard smirked. "Oh, Savannah. You already are." Lucas stood on the rooftop of his high-rise, overlooking the city. The same city that once spat him out like he was nothing. Now, he owned it. Nathan was crumbling. Savannah was a public disgrace. Richard was one step away from prison. Everything was falling into place. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his inside sources. "Richard and Savannah are making a move. They have something on you." Lucas smirked. Of course they did. But he had already planned for this. He turned to the camera beside him, a direct line to the people watching his story unfold. We're at a turning point and you've been with me every step of the way. We've taken down the snakes one by one. But there's one question left. What should I do next? Drop your city in the comments because I want to know. Who's watching? Who's been keeping up with this journey? And more importantly, who's ready for the final act? The city lights flickered below him. Lucas smiled. Because he already knew how this would end. Richard Calloway always had a plan. Always. But tonight? He was improvising. His office, once filled with power brokers and industry giants, was now empty. His lawyers had quit. His board members had turned their backs. The walls that once protected him were collapsing one by one. And it was all because of his own son. Lucas. Richard's fingers drummed against the desk as Savannah paced the room. This isn't working, she snapped. Leaking dirt on Lucas didn't stop him. The media barely ran it, and the people who did? They don't care. Richard exhaled through his nose, his patience razor thin. Because Lucas was smart enough to prepare for it. Savannah's hands trembled as she ran them through her hair. You're acting like this is over. It's not over. We just need. Richard slammed his glass onto the desk. We need to face the reality that Lucas won. Silence. Savannah turned, eyes narrowing. You're giving up? Richard's jaw clenched. I'm accepting that we lost. Savannah stared at him for a long moment before a cold smile spread across her lips. Maybe you lost. She grabbed her purse and walked out, leaving Richard alone with his failure. The great Richard Calloway had finally fallen. And the worst part? His own blood had done it. Lucas sat in a dimly lit bar, sipping his whiskey. Across from him sat the man who once controlled his entire life. Richard Calloway. For the first time in his life his father looked small. No guards. No assistants. No power. Just a man drowning in his own failures. Richard chuckled bitterly, swirling the drink in his glass. I underestimated you. Lucas tilted his head. You never thought I was strong enough, did you? Richard's lips twitched. I thought you were softer. More like your mother. Lucas's grip tightened around his glass. That's where you were wrong. A long pause. Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping. What now? Lucas smirked. Now. You watch as everything you built turns to dust. Richard exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. You got what you wanted. I'm ruined. Lucas leaned in, voice steady. Not yet. But you will be. Then he got up and walked away, leaving his father alone in the ruins of his empire. Savannah Calloway had always been a survivor. She knew how to adapt, manipulate, and escape when necessary. But for the first time in her life, there was no escape. The public humiliation was bad enough. She couldn't step into a restaurant, a boutique, or even a grocery store without people whispering, laughing, recording her. But the worst part? She was broke. The bank accounts she once controlled? Frozen. The luxury credit cards? Declined. The elite friends who once adored her? Gone. She sat in her now half-empty apartment, staring at a bottle of wine, trying to figure out how everything had gone so horribly wrong. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her stomach twisted as she stood, already knowing who it would be. When she opened the door, Nathan stood there. His face was hollow, his suit wrinkled, his hands shaking. He looked like a man on the edge of collapse. Savannah folded her arms. What do you want? Nathan's jaw clenched. We need to fix this. Savannah let out a sharp laugh. Fix this? Lucas burned us to the ground, Nathan. There's nothing left to fix. Nathan took a step closer, desperation in his eyes. We can fight back. Together. Savannah studied him for a long moment. Then she smirked. You still don't get it, do you? Nathan frowned. What? Savannah leaned in, voice dripping with venom. I don't need you. Then she slammed the door in his face. Nathan was on his own. And Savannah? She was going to figure out how to save herself, no matter what it took. Nathan Sterling had never truly cared about anyone except himself. Savannah had been a means to an end. When she was useful, she was his. When she wasn't, disposable. And right now, she was beyond useless. Nathan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His empire was in ruins. His money was drying up. The government was investigating him for fraud. And the only way out was to throw someone else under the bus. Savannah. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. The line clicked. A cold voice answered. "This is Agent Keller." Nathan exhaled, pretending to sound defeated. "I have information for you. About Savannah Calloway." Pause. "Then, go on." Nathan smirked. If Lucas wanted to play dirty, Nathan could play dirtier. Savannah had no idea what was coming. She strutted through the lobby of her condo building, designer sunglasses shielding her face. People still whispered when they saw her, but she ignored them. She was Savannah Calloway. And she always landed on her feet. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Who is this?" "Mrs. Calloway?" A deep, professional voice. "This is Agent Keller with the IRS and SEC Investigations Unit. We need to speak with you about your involvement in fraudulent business activities." Savannah froze. "What?" she breathed. "We have evidence tying you to illegal transactions, tax evasion, and financial fraud. I suggest you cooperate." Savannah's stomach twisted. She knew what this was. Nathan. He had sold her out. Her heart pounded as she rushed toward the elevator, pressing the button frantically. She needed a lawyer. A plan. A way out. The doors closed. Her reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. For the first time in her life, she was powerless. And she hated it. Nathan sat across from his lawyer, feeling a rare sense of relief. The deal was done. He had handed over every single piece of evidence on Savannah. Emails, text messages, secret transactions. Everything. It had taken minutes for the authorities to start the process. Nathan leaned back in his chair. "So what now?" His lawyer smirked. "Now, you're safe. For the moment." Nathan exhaled. It wasn't a victory, but it was survival. His phone buzzed. A single text message. From an unknown number. "You really thought that would save you?" Nathan's stomach dropped. His hands turned clammy. Because he knew exactly who had sent it. Lucas. And if Lucas was watching? That meant Nathan wasn't safe at all. Richard Calloway never begged. He had built his life on power, on making others bow to him. He had crushed competitors, manipulated governments, and controlled everything in his reach. But now, he had nothing. Sitting in his now nearly vacant office, he stared at the legal documents in front of him. Indictments. Subpoenas. Criminal charges. Lucas had orchestrated his downfall so perfectly that Richard hadn't even seen it coming. And now, time had run out. His assistant Laura stepped in, her face pale. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Richard exhaled. "Who?" She hesitated. "Lucas." A slow, burning rage filled his chest, but he masked it with a calm smile. "Send him in." Seconds later, Lucas walked in. Confident. Cold. The man Richard had underestimated. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Richard leaned back in his chair. "You really hate me that much?" Lucas smirked. "Hate? No. You don't deserve that much emotion from me." Richard studied him carefully. "Then why are you here?" Lucas folded his arms. "To watch you break." Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "You're more like me than you want to admit." Lucas's jaw clenched. That was a lie. He would never be his father. Richard picked up a pen, twirling it between his fingers. "This is your last chance to let me walk away, son. Keep me alive, and I can still be useful to you." Lucas tilted his head. "You think I want anything from you?" Richard's smirk faded. For the first time he looked uncertain. Lucas stepped closer, voice low. "The same way you stood by and watched as they took everything from me? That's what I'm doing now." Richard's hands tightened into fists. Lucas leaned down, voice sharp as a blade. "You were right about one thing. I wasn't built for your world. But I adapted." He turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he glanced back. "I'll see you in court, Dad." And then he was gone, leaving Richard Calloway with nothing but his ruined empire and his own regrets. Savannah paced her apartment, gripping her phone so tightly her nails dug into her palm. Nathan had betrayed her. Richard had given up. And Lucas? He was winning. For years, she had controlled her life with beauty, charm, and manipulation. But none of that was working now. Her phone rang. She answered immediately. "Well?" Her lawyer exhaled heavily. "It's bad, Savannah. The government has enough to press charges against you. Financial fraud. Tax evasion. Wire fraud. You could be looking at serious time. Her hand shook. This is ridiculous. You can fix it. Pause. Not this time. Savannah felt the air leave her lungs. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to protect her. No Nathan. No Richard. No power. She was alone. And Lucas had made sure of it. Her phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. This is Karma, Savannah. Her breath hitched. She knew who it was. Lucas. Tears burned in her eyes as reality crashed down on her. This was what it felt like to lose everything. Nathan was spiraling. Sitting in a dark motel room, whiskey bottle in hand, he stared at his laptop screen. The financial world had officially buried him. His company? Gone. His savings? Froze. His name? Destroyed. And there was only one man responsible. Lucas Calloway. Nathan's fingers twitched against the table. He had spent his life manipulating others, but this wasn't a game anymore. This was revenge. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. When the person on the other end answered, Nathan's voice was cold. I need someone taken care of. Silence. Then, who? Nathan's lips curled into a sick smirk. Lucas. Lucas knew something was wrong the moment he stepped out of his office that night. The air was too still. The city noises around him seemed too quiet. He had spent the last few months tearing apart the lives of those who had betrayed him. Now, someone was finally desperate enough to strike back. His instincts screamed at him, but Lucas didn't stop walking. If Nathan was this reckless, he was already finished. He reached his car, pulling out his keys, then he saw the shadow move. Too fast. A man lunged from the alley, a knife glinting in the dim streetlight. Lucas reacted on instinct. He sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted. The man screamed as the knife clattered onto the pavement. Lucas shoved him against the brick wall, his forearm pressing against the man's throat. Who sent you? The man struggled, eyes wild. I. Footsteps. Behind him. Lucas ducked just in time as another man swung a metal pipe at his head. 2 attackers. He moved fast, grabbing the second man's wrist and slamming him onto the pavement. He twisted the knife off the ground and pressed it to his neck. Who sent you? Lucas growled. The man gasped. Sterling. He wants you dead. Lucas didn't react, his mind working fast. Nathan was trying to kill him now? A slow, dark smirk spread across Lucas's lips. Nathan was out of options. And that meant one thing, it was time to finish this. Lucas stood, wiping his hands on his suit. Tell your boss something for me, he said. The man nodded frantically. Lucas leaned in. I'm coming for him. Savannah had lost everything. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut as she stood outside the luxury penthouse that had once been her entire world. Now, the doorman wouldn't even let her in. I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway, he said, voice polite but firm. Your lease has been terminated. The bank repossessed the property. Savannah felt her breath hitch. No. That's impossible. The doorman gave her a pitying look. The building manager said if you showed up, I should tell you to find somewhere else to go. Her hands trembled. Find somewhere else to go, she repeated, voice hollow. Where? She had no family left. Her friends? They had all abandoned her the second her name was ruined. The city she once ruled had turned against her. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall. She wouldn't break down in front of these people. Not yet. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to find a way out of this. But as she stepped onto the cold streets, reality sank in. For the first time in her life, she had no safety net. No power. No control. And worst of all, no one was coming to save her. Richard Calloway had spent his life building his name. Now, that name was being dragged through the mud on national television. He sat in his luxury prison, a hotel room he had retreated to, away from the reporters, the cameras, and the chaos. But he couldn't escape the news. The TV blared with coverage of his trial. Richard Calloway, once one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, is now facing multiple criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate corruption. Richard's grip tightened around his glass. It wasn't just business enemies attacking him. Former friends were cutting ties. Politicians who once accepted his donations were now condemning him. And at the center of it all? Lucas. A slow, burning fury settled in his chest. His own son had done this to him. Richard's phone rang. He picked it up, expecting to hear from one of his few remaining allies. Instead, the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Dad." "Lucas." Richard's jaw tightened. "You have some nerve calling me?" Lucas's voice was calm. "Controlled. Dangerous. Just wanted to check in. See how it feels to lose everything." Richard exhaled through his nose. "You think this is over?" Lucas chuckled softly. "No. But for you it's about to be." The line went dead. Richard gritted his teeth. Lucas thought he had won? Not yet. Because Richard still had one move left. Nathan Sterling sat in the back of a dingy bar, sweating, shaking, drowning in whiskey. The man who had once stood at the top, who had stolen, manipulated, and taken whatever he wanted, was now a ghost of himself. His business? Gone. His money? Frozen. His power? Vanished. And now Lucas had sent a message. "I'm coming for him." Nathan gritted his teeth, knocking back another drink. He needed a way out. That's when he saw the one person who might be desperate enough to help him. Savannah. She walked into the bar like she didn't belong there, her designer coat looking out of place in the filth around her. But her eyes were empty. Nathan smirked bitterly. She was just as ruined as he was. Savannah slid into the booth across from him. "We need to talk." Nathan scoffed, swirling his drink. "What's there to talk about? We're both screwed." Savannah leaned in, her voice cold. "Not yet. But we will be if we don't do something." Nathan tilted his head, watching her carefully. "You have a plan?" Savannah's lips curled. "Not a plan. An escape." Nathan's pulse quickened. "Keep talking," he said. Because if there was one thing Nathan knew how to do, it was save himself. Savannah sat in the cheap hotel room she had rented for the night, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was smudged. Her hair was messy, unstyled, unpolished. She looked like a stranger. For years she had been untouchable. Powerful. Beautiful. Unstoppable. But now, she was just a woman who had lost everything. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from Nathan. "I have a meeting set up. We'll be safe soon." Savannah's throat tightened. Safe? Would she ever be safe again? She thought back to the first night she cheated on Lucas. The thrill, the excitement, the power she had felt. She had thought she was winning. But now, Lucas had beaten her at her own game. A tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time in her life, Savannah Calloway had no one left to lie to. Not even herself. Lucas stood in the grand hall of an exclusive auction house, watching as the items were sold off one by one. Furniture. Artwork. Memorabilia. Everything Nathan and Savannah once owned. The room was filled with whispers. People who had once envied Nathan and Savannah were now eager to pick apart the remains of their wealth. Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed as he waited for the final lot. The penthouse. Nathan's old home. The one where he and Savannah had planned Lucas's downfall. The auctioneer's voice rang out. "Bidding starts at $2.5 million. Lucas didn't move. Others placed their bids. $3 million. $3.5 million. $4 million. The room buzzed with excitement. Then finally Lucas raised his paddle. $5 million. Silence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer looked around. Any other bids? Nathan sat in the back of the room, watching in horror as Lucas took everything from him. Lucas met his eyes. And smirked. The gavel came down. Sold. The room erupted in applause and Lucas turned, walking out as Nathan sat there, broken. The final piece of his revenge had just fallen into place. Richard Calloway sat in the courtroom, his face carved from stone. Unshaken. Unreadable. But inside, he was calculating. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras flashing every second, the entire country watching as the great Richard Calloway was finally held accountable. The judge's voice rang out, cutting through the tense silence. "Richard Calloway, you have been found guilty of multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and corporate misconduct. You abused your position, manipulated the financial system, and exploited those who trusted you." The words should have meant something. They didn't. What did mean something was Lucas. His son sat in the back row, arms crossed, watching the trial unfold like he had planned it himself. And Richard knew. He had. The judge continued. "Due to the severity of your crimes, you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison." The room erupted in murmurs. The press whispered excitedly, some gasping, others nodding in approval. 15 years. Richard didn't flinch, because he knew how this world worked. He still had contacts, resources, ways to get out early. But then he made the mistake of glancing back. And what he saw shattered him. Lucas, his son, standing, buttoning his suit jacket, turning to leave, not watching, not waiting, not staying to see his father hauled away. Because to Lucas, Richard was already dead. For the first time, something in Richard broke. He had built an empire. He had controlled everything. But in the end, he had lost the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him. And he had no one to blame but himself. The guards approached him. Handcuffs locked around his wrists. Richard exhaled slowly. And as he was led out of the courtroom, he realized something he had never admitted to himself before. Lucas had won. And this time there was no coming back. Nathan sat in the back of a dingy motel, staring at the cracked, stained walls. His fingers twitched. His eyes burned. His thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Lucas had taken everything. His money. His business. His reputation. And now, Nathan was a ghost. No one returned his calls. His former business partners had erased him. His name was a joke in high society. And the worst part? He knew this was only the beginning. A knock at the door made him jolt. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he hesitated, then pulled himself up and opened the door. A man in a suit stood there, his face blank. Nathan Sterling? Nathan swallowed hard. Yeah. The man handed him a legal document. Nathan's fingers trembled as he took it. His vision blurred as he skimmed the words. Federal investigation. Subpoena for court appearance. Potential criminal charges pending. His knees nearly buckled. No, he whispered. Not this. Not again. The man spoke, his voice emotionless. You're advised to get a lawyer. Nathan's throat tightened. I don't have one. The man didn't care. Then you'll have to figure it out. And then he turned and walked away, leaving Nathan standing in the doorway, shaking. The paper slipped from his fingers. Lucas wasn't done with him. He wasn't just ruined. He was going to prison. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Savannah sat on a park bench, the wind whipping through her hair. It had come to this. She had no home, no money, no future. And the only person who had the power to change that? Lucas. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the letter she had written, the last thing she had left to give. A final plea. Lucas, you won. You took everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to speak to me again. But I need you to understand something. I was selfish. I was cruel. But I did love you once. And I know now that I never deserved you. I just hope that one day you can look back and remember the good before all of this. Savannah. She swallowed hard, blinking against the tears burning in her eyes. She sealed the letter, addressed it, and walked toward the mailbox. But as she stood there, staring at the slot, her hands froze. Would Lucas even read it? Would he even care? A wave of hopelessness crashed over her. Because she knew the truth. Lucas had already erased her from his life. And no letter would ever change that. Her fingers trembled as she let the letter slip from her grip. It fluttered in the wind, landing in the gutter. She didn't pick it up. She turned, walking away. For the first time in her life, Savannah Calloway had nothing left to say. Lucas Calloway stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, overlooking the city that had once chewed him up and spat him out. Only this time? He owned it. The skyline stretched before him, a kingdom rebuilt from the ruins they had left him in. But now he wasn't just another businessman. He was the man who had burned his enemies to the ground. Nathan? A walking corpse waiting for his prison sentence. Savannah? A ghost of the woman she used to be. Richard? Rotted away in a cell just like he deserved. Everything was done. And yet, Lucas inhaled sharply, the weight in his chest heavier than he expected. The revenge was complete. The war was over. So why did he feel so empty? He had spent every waking moment planning their destruction. Every night was consumed by strategies, betrayals, and watching them crumble. Now there was nothing left to fight. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, expecting one of his associates. Instead, when he opened the door, she was there. The last person he expected to see. Sophia Hayes stood in the doorway, a cautious smile on her lips. Lucas's breath caught. She had been the only person who never betrayed him. the only one who had stood by him when the world collapsed, before she had left to escape the chaos. "You look surprised," she said softly. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "I thought you were done with all this." Sophia tilted her head. "Are you?" Lucas didn't have an answer. She stepped inside, her gaze scanning the penthouse that once belonged to Nathan. She let out a small laugh. "I see you've made yourself comfortable." Lucas smirked. "I always take what I deserve." Sophia turned to face him. "And what now? Do you keep destroying people? Or do you finally start living?" Lucas clenched his jaw. "I don't know how to live anymore." Pause. Then Sophia reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it on the table. "Then maybe this will help." Lucas frowned, picking it up. "What is it?" Sophia smiled. "A choice." And then she turned and walked out, leaving him staring at the envelope, the weight of his past pressing down on him. For the first time in years, Lucas wasn't plotting someone's downfall. For the first time, he was faced with the possibility of something else. Lucas hesitated before opening the envelope. Inside was a plane ticket. A one-way flight. A fresh start. A chance to leave everything behind. For years, his entire life had been about revenge, payback, power. Could he really just walk away now? His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number, one more target. "Ewan?" Lucas exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the phone. The old him would have answered without hesitation. Would have burned another life to the ground without thinking twice. But now there was a choice. His eyes flicked to the plane ticket on the table. The past? Or the future? He had spent his whole life chasing vengeance. Maybe it was finally time to chase something else. Lucas sat in his penthouse, staring at the phone in one hand and the plane ticket in the other. It was a moment of decision. For years, his entire existence had been fueled by revenge. He had torn down the people who had betrayed him, crushed them until there was nothing left. Now someone was offering him one more target. One more chance to destroy. The old him wouldn't have hesitated. But Sophia's words lingered in his mind. "Do you keep destroying people? Or do you finally start living?" For the first time in years, Lucas didn't know what to do. A knock on the door made his jaw tighten. He slid the phone into his pocket, shoved the plane ticket into a drawer and walked over to open the door. A man in a black suit stood there, sharp-eyed and expressionless. "Mr. Calloway," the man said. "We should talk." Lucas studied him. "And you are?" The man handed him a business card. "Damien Locke, Intelligence Bureau." Lucas's pulse didn't even spike. He had expected this. He had pushed too many people too far to believe he'd walk away untouched. He stepped aside. "Come in." The man entered, taking in the penthouse with a glance. "You've made quite a name for yourself." Lucas poured himself a drink, his smirk cold. "Depends on who you ask." Damien sat on the couch, leaning forward. "You dismantled a billionaire's empire, took down a corporate tycoon, and crushed a high society elite. You don't do that without making enemies." Lucas shrugged. "I had my reasons." Damien nodded. "I believe you." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" Damien exhaled, pulling out a file. He slid it across the table. Lucas didn't pick it up. "This isn't about Richard or Nathan or Savannah," Damien said. "This is about what happens next." Lucas finally opened the file. His stomach tightened. Inside were photos of another man. A powerful one. A name he recognized. Damien's voice was quiet but firm. "There's a bigger game being played, Mr. Calloway. You've proven you can take down powerful people. Now the question is, are you done?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. Revenge had defined him. But was it all he had left? Lucas sat in his office, staring at an envelope with his name on it. It had arrived that morning. No return address. No markings. Just a single handwritten note. "From your father." Lucas didn't move for a long time. He had walked away from Richard's trial. Hadn't looked back. The man was dead to him. And yet, here he was, holding the last words of Richard Calloway. Slowly he opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. "Lucas, you won. You took everything from me just like I took everything from you. I always knew you had my blood in you. I just never thought you'd use it against me. I should have seen it coming. But let me tell you something, son. Power is a cycle. I fell today, but one day you will too. Because men like us? We don't get to live normal lives. We don't get peace. We survive. Until we don't. One day you'll look in the mirror and realize you became exactly what you hated. And when that day comes, you'll understand me in ways you never wanted to. Richard Calloway. Lucas read the letter twice. Then he burned it. Richard had spent his life thinking power was the only thing that mattered. Lucas wasn't going to make the same mistake. Or at least he hoped not. Lucas drove outside the city, pulling up to the cemetery gates just as the sun began to set. He hadn't been here in years. He walked slowly, his steps measured, until he reached the small marble headstone. His mother's name was carved into it. A woman who had once been his entire world. Lucas exhaled, kneeling in front of the grave. "I did it, Mom," he whispered. The wind rustled through the trees, filling the silence. Lucas closed his eyes. "I took everything back. They got what they deserved. Every last one of them." The words felt hollow. He had won. He had destroyed the people who hurt him. But was he really free? He pulled out the plane ticket Sophia had given him, staring at it. A fresh start. A new life. Could he really leave it all behind? Or was he too far gone? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying his mother's presence. And for the first time in years, Lucas let himself grieve. Grieve for the boy he used to be. The life he had lost. The people he had trusted. Then, slowly he stood up, exhaling. And he made his decision. It was time to leave. Lucas sat at the airport lounge, a whiskey glass in hand, the one-way plane ticket lying on the table in front of him. For the first time in years there was no plan, no revenge, no target. Just a choice. He glanced at his phone. No missed calls. No messages. Not from Nathan. Not from Savannah. Not from Richard. They were gone. He had won. So why did it feel like something was missing? The flight announcement echoed through the lounge. Final boarding call for Flight 228 to Barcelona. Lucas exhaled. This was it. He reached for his ticket. And his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the screen. Then instinct took over. He answered. "Who is this?" A woman's voice, steady and smooth. "Mr. Calloway. I believe we have a mutual interest." Lucas leaned back in his chair. "And what would that be?" A slight pause. Then, "A man named Damien Locke. And the offer he made you." Lucas's jaw tightened. He glanced around the lounge, suddenly aware that he was being watched. This wasn't over. Not yet. Lucas sat in a private room inside the airport, across from a woman he had never met before, but somehow she knew everything about him. Her name was Victoria Kane. And she was offering something he didn't expect. "I know you've been given a choice," she said, sipping her black coffee. "Start over. Walk away. Or..." She slid a folder across the table. Lucas didn't open it. Not yet. "What's this?" he asked. "A name," Victoria said. "A man far worse than your father. A man who's built his empire on the kind of corruption even you wouldn't tolerate." Lucas smirked. "And you think I care?" Victoria leaned in, eyes sharp. "I think you're at a crossroads, Mr. Calloway. You can board that plane and disappear. Or you can finish what you started." Lucas stared at the folder, his pulse slow and steady. The plane ticket burned in his pocket. The new life waiting for him. He could walk away. Or he could take the folder. His fingers twitched. Then, slowly he reached for it. Victoria smiled. "I thought so." Nathan was drowning. Every door had closed. Every escape route had been blocked. And now he was desperate. Sitting in a dingy motel, staring at the pile of unpaid bills, the court summons and the threats from men he owed money to, he realized there was only one way out. His fingers hovered over his phone. Lucas had destroyed him. But Lucas had also won. Nathan had one last move left. One last way to get back in the game. He dialed the number. A voice answered, cold and precise. "Nathan." Nathan's throat went dry. "I have information. About Lucas. And I think you'll want it." Pause. Then the voice said something that made Nathan's pulse spike. "Tell me everything." Nathan exhaled. It wasn't over. Not yet. Lucas sat in his office, the folder Victoria Kane had given him resting on the desk, unopened. The city lights glowed behind him, casting long shadows over the room. He had a choice. The plane ticket to Barcelona still lay in his pocket, his way out, his chance at a new life. But in front of him? A name. A man whose crimes made his father's corruption look like child's play. A man who controlled entire governments, who ruined lives at a level Lucas had never even imagined. Victoria had called it a crossroads. Lucas didn't believe in fate, but he believed in decisions. And right now he was staring at the biggest one of his life. His phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Did you get on the plane?" His jaw clenched. He had promised himself that once this was over, he'd be done. No more power games. No more destruction. No more revenge. But some part of him, the part that had spent years rebuilding himself from the ashes, wasn't ready to walk away. Lucas exhaled, picked up the folder, and flipped it open. The moment he saw the name inside, his decision was made. His pulse slowed. His mind sharpened. Barcelona could wait. Because this wasn't over. Nathan sat in a dark alleyway, hands shaking as he waited. He had nothing left. No home. No business. No future. And now, he was selling Lucas out to the highest bidder. The black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows giving nothing away. A man stepped out dressed in all black. He was cold, calculated, one of the most dangerous men in the city. "You have information," the man said, his voice sharp. Nathan nodded, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. Everything on Lucas Calloway. His plans, his resources, his weaknesses. The man took it, studying Nathan with zero emotion. "You think this will save you?" he asked. Nathan's throat tightened. "It should." The man smirked. "You're more pathetic than I thought." Before Nathan could react, a gun was pressed to his temple. His breath hitched. "Wait." A single gunshot echoed through the alley. Nathan collapsed. And the last thought that crossed his mind? Lucas was always 10 steps ahead. Lucas stood on the rooftop of a high-rise, watching the city below. His phone vibrated. A single text from Victoria Kane. "Sterling is dead." Lucas wasn't surprised. Nathan had always been sloppy, desperate, weak. He had made his final mistake and now he was gone. But Lucas wasn't focused on Nathan anymore. His mind was locked onto something bigger. The man in the folder. The real threat. He had spent his whole life thinking his father was the worst enemy he would ever face. But now he realized, Richard was nothing compared to what was coming. Lucas smirked. He had spent years fighting battles he thought were the endgame. But this was just the beginning. Lucas Calloway had spent years chasing revenge. Now he stood at the edge of something bigger. The rooftop was quiet except for the hum of the city below. He leaned against the railing, gripping the file in his hand, the one Victoria Kane had given him. Inside was the name of the man who controlled everything Richard Calloway once dreamed of. A man more powerful, more dangerous, more untouchable. Lucas had torn down an empire before. But could he do it again? His phone buzzed. "Sophia, you never got on that plane, did you?" Lucas stared at the screen. No, he hadn't. Because no matter how much he told himself he was done, he wasn't built to walk away. He slid the phone back into his pocket and turned, stepping inside his penthouse. The air was thick with anticipation. He could feel the weight of his decision. At the bar, Victoria Kane sat waiting, a glass of bourbon in her hand. She smirked as he walked in. "I take it Barcelona will have to wait?" Lucas poured himself a drink. "Tell me what I need to know." Victoria slid a second file across the table. "This man operates at a level you've never encountered before. Richard Calloway was a shark in a city pond. This man?" She tapped the folder. "He owns the entire ocean." Lucas flipped open the file. A black and white photograph stared back at him. Vincent Morello. He recognized the name immediately. Morello wasn't just another corrupt billionaire. He controlled entire economies, owned politicians, and built his empire on things even Lucas wouldn't touch. Drug trafficking, arms dealing, government contracts. And yet, his father had once stood in this man's shadow, dreaming of being his equal. Victoria's voice was smooth but firm. "You've spent years bringing down the people who ruined your life. But if you want true power, if you want to matter beyond personal revenge, this is your chance." Lucas took a slow sip of whiskey. "And what do you get out of this?" Victoria smiled. "I like watching powerful men fall." Lucas smirked. He did too. He closed the file, tapping his fingers against the cover. He had two choices. Take the plane ticket. Leave the past behind. Or step into an entirely new war. His pulse was steady. His decision already made. "This is my last job," he said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Lucas's smirk deepened. "We'll see." Prison was a place for broken men. Richard Calloway was not one of them. At least that's what he told himself. He sat in the small, dimly lit visitor's room, the cold metal table pressing against his forearms. His once tailored suits and expensive watches were gone. Instead, he wore the same beige uniform as every other washed-up king who had lost his empire. A guard entered the room, nodding toward him. "You have a visitor." Richard frowned. He hadn't expected anyone. His old allies had abandoned him, his power stripped away. But when the door opened, his breath caught. Lucas stepped inside, dressed in black, exuding the kind of presence Richard used to own. The kind of power he had spent his life chasing. Richard straightened, forcing himself to smirk. Finally came to gloat? Lucas took a seat across from him, resting his hands on the table. His eyes, cold, unreadable. Nothing like the sun Richard had raised. Lucas tilted his head. "I just wanted to see for myself. See what a man looks like after he's lost everything." Richard exhaled through his nose. "You think you've won?" Lucas leaned forward. "I don't think. I know." Silence stretched between them. For the first time in Richard's life he had no words. Lucas exhaled, glancing around the room. "You spent your life chasing power. And now, you have nothing. No money. No influence. No allies." Richard clenched his fists under the table. Lucas smirked. "And the best part? You'll rot in here knowing that I'm out there running the world you once controlled." Richard forced a chuckle, though it lacked its usual arrogance. "You sound just like me, son." Lucas's smirk faded. "I'm nothing like you." Richard tilted his head. "Aren't you? Look at what you've done. You've destroyed people. You've manipulated, controlled, taken what you wanted." Lucas's expression didn't waver. Richard leaned in, his voice lower now. "You think this is over? That you can walk away and be some kind of normal man?" He let out a slow, knowing chuckle. "You're trapped, Lucas. The moment you took your first step into power, there was no way out." Lucas's jaw tightened. Because for the first time Richard wasn't lying. His father smirked. "You're me, son. You just haven't admitted it yet." Lucas exhaled through his nose, standing up. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't spare his father another glance. He walked to the door, pausing just before stepping out. Then without turning back he spoke. "I hope you live long enough to see just how wrong you are." And then he was gone. Leaving Richard Calloway behind, drowning in his own regrets. Lucas drove out of the city, the skyline fading in his rearview mirror. He had spent years chasing revenge. Now, with Nathan gone, Savannah erased, and Richard rotting in prison, there was nothing left to fight for. So why did it feel like he was still chained to all of it? The road stretched ahead, open and endless, but the weight in his chest remained. Was this freedom? Or just another kind of prison? His phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A message from Sophia. "I'm still waiting for you to get on that plane. But something tells me you won't." Lucas exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. She wasn't wrong. Because as much as he wanted to believe he could just walk away, something inside him wouldn't let go. The past wasn't a place you could leave behind. It followed you. He pulled off the highway, parking in front of a small cemetery. The last time he was here he had still been full of anger, full of purpose. Now he wasn't sure what he was. He walked between the rows of headstones, stopping at the small marble one that bore his mother's name. For a long moment he just stood there, staring. "I did it," he said softly. "I took everything back. I made them pay." The wind stirred the grass around him, the sky stretched wide and gray. Lucas swallowed hard. "But now, I don't know what's left." Silence. He closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. Maybe that was the point. Maybe there wasn't anything left. Maybe this was the moment he had to decide who he was going to be. Lucas opened his eyes, stepping back from the grave. No more looking behind. It was time to face what came next. And this time, he wouldn't let the past decide for him. Lucas Calloway had spent his life fighting ghosts. Ghosts of betrayal. Ghosts of loss. Ghosts of the man he used to be. Now, standing on the rooftop of his penthouse, overlooking the city he had once been forced to crawl away from, he realized something. He had won the war. Nathan was dead. Savannah was erased. Richard was locked in a cage, left to rot. Every piece of his revenge had been executed perfectly. So why did it feel like something was still missing? The answer was simple. Because revenge doesn't give you peace. It gives you control, power, victory. But peace? That's something else entirely. And for the first time, Lucas wondered if he was even capable of it. A slow smirk crossed his lips. Maybe peace wasn't meant for men like him. His phone buzzed. A message from Victoria Kane. The job's waiting, Calloway. One move and you could own everything. Are you in? Lucas exhaled. The old him wouldn't have hesitated. Would have jumped into the next battle without a second thought. But now he had a choice. He looked down at the two things in his hands. The folder, a new target, a new war. And the plane ticket, a one-way flight, a chance to leave it all behind. For the first time in years, Lucas wasn't forced into a decision. He could choose. He could be the man who kept destroying. Or he could be the man who walked away. His grip tightened. And then he cut to black. If you were Lucas Calloway standing at the edge of everything you've ever known, would you walk away? Or would you take the last job? Drop your answers in the comments below. And if this story kept you hooked, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there's always another story waiting to be told. Like, share, and let me know, would you have played the game or walked away? Because sometimes, the real ending is the one you decide.